9/11 and the Afghan and Iraqi wars, we have had very little in the way of economic contraction, and I attribute that in large measure to the flexibility that has emerged in our financial system, amongst other places, and I would be very concerned were we, in our endeavor to root out very properly criminality from our institutions.
Gentleman, it's time to
we didn't know where the boundary line was.
Gentleman from Vermont.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Greenspan, nice to see you again. I always enjoy your presentations, as you know, and I never cease being astounded about how your observations about our economy are so far removed from the reality that I see every day in my state, middle-class people, and what I see all over the country. It's like we live in two different worlds. You talk about optimism. I see in my state and around this country that the middle class is shrinking, that ordinary people are working longer hours for lower wages. I see that since 2001, 3 million more Americans have become poor. I see more and more Americans without any health insurance. I see retirees now losing the benefits that corporate America promised to them. I see older workers worried about the pensions that they were promised but which they may never get. And that's what I see. That's the bad news. But the good news, which you haven't talked about enough, is that many of your friends, the wealthiest people in this country, are doing phenomenally well. While over the last 27 years, the real income of the bottom 90% of American taxpayers actually fell by 7%, the income of the top 1% rose by 148%, and the income of the richest 1/100th of 1%, the really good friends of yours, they rose by 599%. So maybe that's the difference in perception. Some of us go out, we talk to middle-class people and working people. Now, Mr. Greenspan, over the last 3 years, the U.S. has lost almost 3 million good-paying manufacturing jobs, representing 16% of our total factory workforce. Manufacturing employment has gone down 43 consecutive months, which hasn't happened since the Great Depression. Due to our disastrous trade policies, which you advocate for very, very strongly, American companies have shipped millions of decent-paying jobs overseas to countries like China, where if workers try to form a union, they get fired. If they try to protect the environment, they may go to jail. People like the CEO of General Electric, Jeffrey Immelt, and many others stand up proudly to advocate how they're going to shut down plants in America and move to China. And while decent-paying manufacturing jobs in this country decline, the largest employer in the United States is now Walmart, which pays people poverty wages, fights unions ruthlessly, and provides miserable benefits. A new study came out, as you may be aware of, that indicated that the new jobs being created in this country, primarily service jobs, Walmart-type jobs, pay 21% less than the old jobs that we are losing. Not only are we losing manufacturing jobs, we're now losing white-collar information technology jobs because they're going to India. Now, last year, what I thought was an incredible statement, you stated, and let me quote it. Quote, "Is it important for an economy to have manufacturing? There is a big dispute on this issue. If there is no concern about access to foreign producers of manufactured goods, then I think you can argue it does not really matter whether or not you produce them or not." End of quote, Mr. Alan Greenspan. In other words, according to you, it doesn't matter whether we get our goods purchased in China from people making 20 cents an hour or they're produced in the United States from people making $20 an hour. Now, interestingly, and this is my question, the Bush administration apparently agrees with you. According to the Seattle Times, the Bush administration believes, and I quote, "The movement of American factory jobs and white-collar work to other countries is part of a positive transformation that will enrich the U.S. economy." So my question is, do you agree with the Bush administration that it doesn't matter if we lose good-paying manufacturing and information technology jobs, and they're replaced by low-wage Walmart jobs?
Congressman, let me actually agree with some of your figures, but give you a different perspective on what creates them. First of all, if all of the jobs are being lost in the United States over the years, and this goes back to the problems we used to have where we were losing jobs to low-wage Japan, then we were losing jobs to low-wage Mexico, then to low-wage China. Now the Mexicans are complaining that they're losing jobs to low-wage China.
Yes.
Through all of this, the real wage of the average American has been rising, and rising at a reasonably strong clip. The question that you, I think, properly raise is the income distribution question, because it is the case that people at the lower end of the skill spectrum have had very considerable difficulty in raising their real wages, where those at the upper end have shown significant so-called skill premiums. And what this turns out to be, regrettably, is a problem of a mismatch between a growing, more sophisticated conceptual capital stock, meaning the means by which we produce goods and services in this country is ever increasingly more ideas and skills and less physical input and manual labor. That's been the long-term...
I don't mean to interrupt you, sir, and I wish we had more... But you didn't answer my question. Do you agree with the President? Do you agree with the President that it's a good idea that we lose good-paying jobs?
Governor Castle.
Can he answer the question?
Thank you. Gentleman's
I
time has
can't
expired.
answer the question without answering the question,
Well,
and I'm trying to do that.
Gentleman from Delaware.
Mr. Chairman.
The point that I'm trying to suggest to you, Congressman, is that the gross domestic product in this country is becoming increasingly more conceptual as the years go on over the generations, and that it is important for our workforce, of necessity, to match the skills that are required to produce the goods and services which we do. Regrettably, we need to do more as far as education is concerned to move our skills level in line with the growth in the conceptual underlying technology of what it is we produce. We have not been able, please.
The gentleman's time has once again expired. The gentleman from Delaware.
But may I just make one final sentence, please? The point at issue here is that we are ending up with an inadequate ability to move skills up sufficiently quickly. And this, as you point out, has created a problem of excess supply versus demand amongst our lower skills, and the reverse in the top. And that is something we have to address. And I happen to agree with Congressman Frank that it is very important in this country not only to have an equitable society, but to have it perceived as being equitable, because no democratic system can function unless the people believe it is equitable. And I think that it is crucially important for us to reduce the income inequality in this country, and I think the way that one has to do that by any means that I can see is through education. And I must say to you, the community colleges in this country have been in the forefront of a major change in the quality of what we are doing with respect to reestablishing skills. So I agree with your numbers, I just disagree with the conclusion you've come to.
Gentleman from the first state.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to sort of build on what you were just talking about, Mr. Chairman, and that you talked about income inequality, and you brought in education. And I serve as the head of an education subcommittee, and I've been involved with No Child Left Behind, and I also serve on the higher education subcommittee as well. And I would like your views on what role that you see for our country's educational system in preparing and supplying properly trained workers for our economic society, our society at large. And like everybody else, I'm concerned about the job drain, et cetera. And I happen to believe that some of this is educationally related to a great degree. You mentioned junior colleges, but there's also the whole function of the equality I think that we need in K through 12th grade, as well as opportunities to go to all colleges, et cetera, in this country. And I think it's a more significant part of our economic broad picture than perhaps meets the eye. And I'd be interested in your views on that, sir.
Well, Congressman, I find discouraging the fact that in the recent evaluations of the ranking of our students internationally in math and science, which finds the American students sort of average, maybe slightly better than average, in the 4th grade. And by the time we get to the 8th and the 12th grade, we have deteriorated significantly. And what this suggests to me is that we are falling short in getting an adequate number of people through our elementary and secondary schools into colleges, and thereby increasing the supply of skilled workers and effectively bringing down the so-called skill premium, which would be a major factor in reducing income inequality in this country. Not only is it the issue of moving students much more rapidly from 4th grade through high school and into colleges, but and its impact obviously on higher skills, but in doing that you also reduce the supply in a number of the lower skills, which will raise their wages and have an effect of rebalancing the structure of wage changes in the United States so that the skill differentials are significantly different from where they are at this particular stage. And that, to me, is an issue that says that we have to find ways to create a curriculum which enables us to compete with a significant part of the rest of the world, and a lot of the rest of the world to which I am referring is the so-called developing world. And I don't know enough about specifics of curricula and how one would improve that, but I do know what the effect is, and I do know that it is obviously possible because they're doing it everywhere else in the world and we're not. And if we want to maintain an economy and a society which has been at the cutting edge of technology, the highest real incomes of any major country, we have to enhance the capability of the skills of people coming out of our schools. You cannot have a highly complex capital structure without skilled people to essentially staff it. I think immigration is obviously one thing that is helping in part. It's filling in a lot of the slots where skills are required. But we shouldn't be needing to do that. We should be doing it with our own students and enhancing their capabilities in a manner which would enable our increasingly complex capital stock to function and maintain these very long-term improvements in productivity, which, even though I expect them to slow down from the recent pace, nonetheless, even at half of where they've recently been, it's a major advance over what we experienced in the period of, say, the 1970s and 1980s.
Well, I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, and my time is going to expire here. And I think it's very important that the whole country understands that tie-in between education and our economy and the significance of it individually and individuals and families, as well as the overall economy. And while I won't have time to ask the question, I would just like to credit your comments in your statement on the deficit. There's a lot of wisdom there in terms of what we have to do. I'm one of those who believes that we have to put everything on the table, all the way from looking at tax cuts to homeland security and defense, as well as other discretionary mandatory spending, and make some hard and fast decisions. And I think you have underlined that very well in your statement, and I hope that all of us can learn from that as well. And I did note, by the way, the stock market is up a little bit, which always makes me feel good when you're testifying. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Greenspan, we all have a great deal of respect for your knowledge of the economy, and that is why I have to ask, why is the economy so bad for so many of my constituents? Even though the economic indicators look good, the GDP growth is up, there's been improvement in many areas, but still there are no jobs. And I represent a highly educated and skilled constituency, and still highly educated, skilled people cannot find jobs. And this is very, very troubling. I know that you have lowered interest rates 13 times since President Bush was elected, and interest rates are at a historic low. But some observers believe that you are keeping a low federal fund rate because of the stagnant job situation. The economy needs to create 125,000 to 150,000 jobs a month just to keep up with the growing labor force, and last month we created only 112,000 jobs. So my question is, how heavily is the job situation and job stagnation affecting the Federal Reserve interest rate policy? I know that there are many different variables. I'm not talking about the other variables, but what we're seeing is all the other variables are going up, yet the jobs are continuing to fall, basically. We can't even get up to where we began when President Bush took office. So my question is Is it the job stagnation that is keeping this historic low rate?
No, it's basically our overall view of what the balance of forces are in the economy. And what we've tried to indicate is that given our evaluation of what the economic outlook is, what we view the outlook for inflation, for growth, for productivity and jobs, all in combination have placed us at a point where we believe the most appropriate rate is 1% for the federal funds rate. And I don't want to get involved into any more of the particular details, but I would scarcely say, that, as I indicated to one of your colleagues a moment ago, that any particular variable in our economy is driving monetary policy. Obviously, for reasons I've mentioned before with respect to the question of concerns about people who are not only having difficulty finding jobs because the hiring rate is so low, but there's also the problem that no one has mentioned, which is a difficult issue, that when people get laid off and they do seek jobs, on average, for a while at least, their income rate goes down. Mm-hmm. And that is a factor which has been clearly over the years a significant issue, suppressing the overall growth in real incomes in the society. So what we have got is a highly mobile population, and it's one in which the job turnover numbers are awesome. We, in fact, hire 1 million people a week in this country, and more or less 1 million people lose jobs or quit jobs during a week. So there's a huge churning. But that means there's a very substantial number of people who are on the wrong side of that churning, and some of them, I mean, currently 2 million have been looking for jobs for over a year and can't find them. So, I mean, it may be a relatively small part of the population, but it's still millions. And we are acutely aware of what these elements do to a society. So, I mean, we may be governors of the Federal Reserve, but we're also citizens of this country.
So given what you've said today in your testimony, and given the fact that you have accommodated this with a very low federal funds rate, a historically low one, and is it safe to say that you disagree with the report that came out yesterday from the Bush administration's economic policy advisors that next year we will create 2.6 million jobs? That's what this report says. That's what the report came out.
I haven't read the specific...
Well, it says we're going to create 2.6 million jobs.
I haven't read the specific details of their forecast. My impression is that they have a significant decline in the rate of productivity advance from where it has been recently. And if you get
Do you agree or disagree?
Generally, time's expired.
I haven't read it, so I don't... I said to one of your colleagues earlier, it is a credible forecast if the rate of productivity slows down to a more historical average.
Generally, time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Chairman Greenspan. I want to call attention to the committee that I certainly was pleased that you brought up the subject of deficits because Deficits obviously do cause a problem, and you mentioned that deficits may eventually cause interest rates to go up. But I also would like to suggest that deficits alone are not the problem, because whether you borrow the money or tax the money out of the economy, it still puts pressure on the capital markets. So deficits alone are not the problem. It's big government, it's big spending, and the amount we spend here that really counts. But you said that deficits future expectations of deficits could raise interest rates, and I certainly would agree with that. But we also must remember that future expectations of the inflation rate and future expectations of the value of the dollar also can raise interest rates. Those are monetary policy causes, and therefore the pressure or the emphasis or the blame for high interest rates that will come can't be put on the deficit alone, and has to be put on those who manage monetary policy. Also, you warned on page 7 that the printing presses won't run indefinitely. You used the word indefinitely, and that's good, because if they do run this fast indefinitely, we all know what will and can happen. So that's good that eventually you will turn the printing presses off, but for now you said you can be patient, and that means we'll just let the money flow and see what happens, which I think is a risky proposition. But you mentioned the condition of protectionism. You worry about protectionism, which I think is characteristic in all societies that destroy their currencies, and especially when you have fluctuating fiat currencies, people yield to the temptations of protectionism. But once again, there are different ways of bringing about protectionism. There are the tariffs, but there's also the competitive devaluations and the exchange rate of the dollar, which is a reflection of monetary policy. But my question is related a little bit to the wording of indefinitely and being patient, because they're arbitrary, they're subjective. And in January, your report, FOMC report, omitted two words that were subjective, and that was considerable period. And I find that very interesting and also very alarming. The amount of clout, the amount of power that we as a nation, as we as a committee have allowed to get into the hands of one or two individuals or a committee. From the time the market was up to the release of that report, the stock market lost $250 billion as a reflection of the concern about the dropping of two words. Friedrich Hayek was fond of saying that the managed economy was in danger because it was based on a pretense of knowledge that certain things the economic planners don't know. And for instance, he would agree with me that we don't know, you don't know, the Congress doesn't know what the overnight rates ought to be, and that we reject the marketplace. But it's part of the system, and I understand that. But doesn't it ever occur to you that maybe there's too much power in the hands of those who control monetary policy, the power to create the financial bubbles, the power to maybe bring the bubble about, the power to change the value of the stock market within minutes? That to me is just an ominous power and challenges the whole concept of freedom and liberty and sound money.
Congressman, as I've said to you before, the problem you're alluding to is called the conversion of a commodity standard to fiat money. We have statutorily gone on to a fiat money standard, and as a consequence of that, it is inevitable that the authority which is the producer of the money supply will have inordinate power. And this is one of the reasons why I've indicated, because of that, and because of the fact that we are unelected officials, it is mandatory that we be as transparent as we conceivably can, and remember that we are accountable to the electorate and to the Congress. And the power that we have is all granted by you. We don't have any capability whatsoever to do anything without the agreement or even the acquiescence of the Congress of the United States. We recognize that, and one of the reasons I'm here today is to endeavor to convey why we are doing what we are doing. And I will continue to do that, and I'm sure that all of my colleagues are fully aware of the responsibility that the Congress has given us, and I trust that we adhere to principles of the Constitution of the United States more so than one would ordinarily do.
And I agree with you. The responsibility is here in the Congress.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Greenspan, welcome once again. And I always try to take your macro approach, which you have responsibility for, and put it in my own context, because while economics may be macro, politics is local, which is a little bit micro. And so I've been listening intently to what you have to say and trying to put it in the context of the North Carolina situation. And I want to read a little excerpt and then ask you a question or two. This excerpt from a report says, in 9 states that cover most regions of the country, and North Carolina is one of those states, the number of unemployed workers projected to exhaust their regular benefits between January and June 2004 without receiving any further assistance is larger than the number for any previous January to June period on record. And then it says the most dramatic story is in North Carolina. The 61,600 unemployed workers who are expected to exhaust their regular benefits without being able to receive further aid is 50% higher than the next highest level on record. Now, I'm trying to apply what you have said to North Carolina, and I know you've got the whole 50 states to apply it to, but if I do so, a couple of things jump out at me. Number one, North Carolina is reputed to have among the best community college systems in the country. Number two, I'm trying to figure out exactly how productivity, which is what you say is sustaining the failure to hire people, how that kind of plays out in North Carolina with all of the plant closings that we have had, because a closed plant can't either be productive or unproductive. I mean, there's not going to be any jobs there. So I guess my question is, number one, would extending unemployment benefits be stimulative to the economy, first of all? And number two, can you put in context the macro analysis you've done and help me feel better about what's going on in North Carolina on the micro or local political level?
Yeah. Congressman, I wouldn't put the issue of extending unemployment benefits in North Carolina or anywhere else as an issue related to trying to stimulate the economy. The economy's got plenty of stimulus. If you're going to move on extending unemployment benefits, it should not be for that reason. It should be for reasons of trying to help people, 61,000 who presumably need it, although I suggest to you that unless I'm mistaken, for the economy as a whole, we're going to find that those exhaustees, so to speak, coming off 26 weeks of unemployment insurance, will be heading down in numbers really quite significantly. But I think the important question is, what does one do in a world in which a number of the industries which are running into trouble in this highly dynamic economy with major changes in technology, what does that type of economy do? Well, I remember working with a number of the textile plants in North Carolina. I did a lot of work for Burlington and a number of other operations in the area, and 20, 30 years ago, these were really extraordinarily first-class operations. And over the years, as has happened in so many industries, competition created very difficult conditions for them, and they gradually shrunk in size, and many of them have gone out of business, as you know better than I. What I think is crucially important to do under those conditions is to find ways in which to recognize that the level of real income of a geographical area depends to a very substantial extent on the degree of skill of the population, not the particular jobs they happen to be in. Over the years, people have held very different jobs through North Carolina, and real income has risen materially. What is crucial is to find a way to be sure that new jobs, new ways of doing things can be done, because as occurred in many areas of our country, we have seen big shifts, for example, from steel manufacture to healthcare in geographical regions in which, as steel income went down, real incomes went up because of very major facilities coming on in the healthcare industry. And there are innumerable examples like that. But it happens over time, and while it is happening, it is very distressful to people. The trouble is that you cannot readily stop progress. You can try, but invariably you will fail. And the reason why I say it's very important for us to make certain that our school systems, and as you point out, the excellent community colleges in North Carolina, it's important to find new ways in which the inherent skills of a population can be converted into high real incomes, wholly irrespective of what particular jobs or industries they are in.
Gentleman's time has expired.
It's not an easy issue, but I'm not sure I know of a real alternative to that.
Gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Manzullo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, on Monday, Dr. Gregory Mankiw, Chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, said shipping jobs to low-cost countries is, quote, the latest manifestation of the gains from trade that economists have talked about, end of quote, for centuries. And he also stated in the report that he issued that Chinese exports to the United States, quote, are not a primary factor in the displacement of American manufacturing workers, end of quote. As a member of Congress who was unemployment in the largest city, Rockford, Illinois, which led the nation in unemployment at 25% in 1981, and whose unemployment now is still over 11%, not counting the 4 factories that have decided to close and whose numbers are not counting the unemployment. 2 questions. First of all, do you agree with this statement? And second of all, his further statement was that new jobs will be created, and I'd like to know, my constituents would like to know, what are the new jobs? When are they going to be created? What sectors are they involved in?
Congressman, first let me say that, first I haven't read the article to which you are alluding. At this moment, nor have I seen, other than the quotes in the press this morning, what Dr. Mankiw has said. Let me just say first that he's a first-rate economist, and I must say he's held in the highest esteem amongst his colleagues. I can't comment on specifically what he said with respect to outsourcing because I haven't read it, but with respect to China, I've said very much the same thing, and for a very important reason. If, as has often been argued, that the exchange rate in China is too low and that if it were raised, it would create jobs in the United States, the implication there is that the other sources of low labor input, low labor cost jobs would not displace China, as indeed China displaced a number of East Asian jobs. I think that there are very serious job problems, and there are very serious problems specifically in your area of the United States, and I think we're all acutely aware of the difficulties involved there. I would not, however, try to figure out a policy which would somehow restrict the exports from China.
No, I'm not talking about a policy. I'm talking about the statement.
No, but his statement, as you alluded to me, is that China is not the problem of loss of jobs in the United States.
And I can give the names of gear manufacturing, bearing manufacturing. I can give you lists and lists and lists of American manufacturers, including thousands of unemployed people in my district who have lost their jobs specifically because those products are now being made in China.
No, I don't disagree that that is indeed happening. I'm just merely saying that if China stopped exporting to the United States, that others would take up the slack. And I think in that regard, you would find that it is not a Chinese issue. It's a basic issue of competition internationally.
In the January 30th edition of the Wall Street Journal had an article where China is now outsourcing to North Korea and Vietnam because $150 per month is too much to pay. So water seeking its own level. But the reason I asked the question is I think it's extremely upsetting to my constituents and several members of Congress when the President comes out with a tremendous package on manufacturing, and then right behind his back, almost 180 degrees, the head of the Council of Economic Advisors says, there's no problem with stuff coming in from China. That's not the case. We've got a serious problem going on, and I think we need to address that. But first, the Chief Council of Economic Advisors has to recognize that there is a problem.
Well, is there a question in that last?
No, it's just a nice statement. Okay. But thank you for your input. I appreciate it.
The gentleman yields back.